And of course, we're waiting for that crucial data for the second quarter. The predictions are dire. Let's discuss unemployment, what might be done. We're joined now by Dr. Iraj Abedian, who is the CEO of Pan-African Investments and Research Services, and Peter Attard Montalto, who is the head of capital market research at Intellidex. Peter, let me start with you because you're in the UK, and the UK has just released quite serious unemployment data there. Take us through that, and then what are the implications for a market like South Africa, even more vulnerable in the face of COVID-19?
Well, good evening. The UK economy lost a record number of jobs between April and June, but the unemployment rate actually didn't tick up given these sort of furlough effects that come in. And I think that's really going to be the hard thing looking at the South African data actually is, as was mentioned in your package, some reports of people not being at work and very high numbers, maybe 3 to 3.5 million. But the data doesn't necessarily move a huge amount yet if they are going on to furlough. And we have to really watch, actually, the Q3 is probably going to be more important in South Africa, where you see the end of the TERS scheme from UIF, the end of that furlough scheme coming through. People get converted from furlough into unemployment. But I think we have to remember overall there's been a huge amount of increase in insecurity of labour, in loss of income as well. And I think that's the larger thing we shouldn't really lose track of. And as a result, we should probably think about the end of the year and this sort of maybe 2 to 2.5 million type number at the end of the year is probably going to be the more interesting place to flash this and to watch as an actual interesting place to take a record.
Yeah, so just clarify, you're saying more than 2 million people affected just because of what's been happening?
By the end of the year, potentially. And that assumes a quite slow recovery. It assumes, as we've seen in previous cycles in South Africa, that you often get a much faster bounce back in growth than you do in employment because their capital intensive recovery is often, we saw that after the 2001 rand crisis, we saw that after 2009-10 in South Africa as well. And so, yes, I think a very long tail. And I think that's the bigger thing than, just the numbers for Q2 is a very long tail of impact we're expecting on this through well into next year and beyond.
Iraj, do you agree with that this is a snowball that will get bigger and bigger as the year develops? And that is an incredible amount of people to have lost their jobs for the year.
Absolutely. I mean, there are two issues that we also need to bring in mind or bring to the discussion. The slower the government comes up with a credible strategy, the more that tail effect will be, because a lot of businesses have been hanging on, hoping that the government will come up with a credible strategy. Remember, the president has been promising this since March, definitely since mid-April. Saying next week, in the next 2 weeks, in the next couple of weeks, and yet he's delivered absolutely nothing. And that is where businesses now get to a point, they say, well, all that we have to work with is what we have, which is hotel industry is going down because there is no tourism. All the associated businesses are likewise closing down, losing hope. And a whole lot of sort of multiplier effect that comes from that sector alone is going to mean thousands of jobs, tens of. The mining sector has already, through the Mining Council, announced that 40,000 jobs are at stake. And of course, if you add up all of this, it can gather momentum very, very quickly. So that's just one domestic factor that the government is taking its time, not appreciating the urgency of the matter, and definitely not appreciating how important it is to come out with a policy that we can debate and we can see the impact on different sectors. The second factor that is at play is the depth of global impact. So the longer this uncertainty takes, the deeper the recession will be, and governments and central bankers have pretty much run out of ammunition to do anything about this. So those two factors, domestic and international, are going to have massive impact on unemployment in South Africa.
Well, let me ask you both, starting with you, Iraj. We do think government could talk this week. The Disaster Management Act needs to a renewal in place. If the president speaks to the nation, what would you like to hear? What is a job-saving message given where we are?
a job-saving message would be a credible investment strategy for the turnaround of economy, not for saving lives, which we have done successfully. But from now on, the emphasis has to be with exactly the same political urgency with two things: a turnaround strategy and a very decisive action on corruption, because any policy that you want to do would require a massive investment, partnership with the private sector, with foreign investors, and nobody is going to play real game if the government cannot have a credible anti-corruption strategy. So those two are intertwined, and that's what I would like to hear from the president.
Yeah. Peter, you've also spoken about the corruption, about rent-seeking, this economic term. What do you think needs to be done and said now?
Well, I think in some sense the damage is already done, and the fact that you haven't got a package in place already means that there's a very large number of job losses that are already baked into the system, which have to in some sense be accepted. So it really is, as Iraj was saying, I think about putting in place that recovery plan to zoom out as fast as possible of this crunch, recreating or existing jobs or new jobs in new sectors really has to be the focus. And there's obviously been a lot of talk. I think we discussed this in the recent past about alignment on the surface, at least, between, for instance, the Business for South Africa plan on the one hand, the ANC plan on the other. That is completely meaningless, though, unless you're actually implementing these things around a decent accelerated infrastructure program, around removing blockages and red tape for business, around providing things like energy certainty to massively accelerate a green recovery. All this is meaningless unless you actually do it and deploy the political capital. And that's, I think, at the moment, certainly what investors and businesses are not seeing. And as a result, the baseline has to be an exceptionally slow recovery with this very significant job loss in place.
Sure. Iraj, you were talking about the problem with our trading partners also being stuck. We were talking about UK figures, although the unemployment rate's not going up. Does that make the smaller circles important? And I mean, we've been talking about it for so long, the African trade, local manufacturing, sort of local markets, even township economies.
Yeah, everything matters. When you are in this situation, you can't pick and choose. We don't have the luxury of do we trade with Russia, with UK, with EU, with US, with Africa, with local economy. We need to have a credible industrialization because or localization of the industry is a better term to use, because the opportunities have arisen. But you can't talk about it. You got to come and report to the nation, this is what we have done. And that a cultural change in our political engagement is becoming very important. The talk of promises and plans and what's possible and what's not is way gone. The president and his team, together with the African counterparts, need to think of what we have done and what is in plan as opposed to what is possible. So I see a lot of opportunities. I see a lot of feasible opportunities, both on the infrastructure, intra-trade and intra-investment in the subcontinent especially. But I don't see a political clear appreciation that time is matter, talk is useless, action is what's called for.
Yeah. Peter, let's end with you. Do you agree? And is there opportunity? I mean, some people are saying jobs will be lost. Those jobs will never come back unless we start being creative, unless the economy is re-engineered in future. How do you see that future?
Well, the problem with the South African economy is you generally have these permanent losses of output and permanent losses of employment. And really, when you ratchet that over time, particularly with demographics, with the rising dependency rate there is in South Africa as well, you're going to have a huge demand for this basic income grant. And I think that's the real challenge of this as a policy. On humanitarian terms, it's certainly necessary. South Africa should have this, but it's simply unaffordable because of the size, the size of the fiscal problem, the fiscal cliff, etc. But I think talking to Iraj's point, I think that this is why the situation is so frustrating, because this potential is so obvious and easy to deploy in simplistic technocratic terms. Of course, the political economy is the sticking point and where we're not seeing movement. And as a result, there's much more gloomy status quo. But I think that I would definitely reinforce there's a huge amount of potential. Infrastructure alone, we can easily see a 2 trillion round of inflow over a decade, say, into infrastructure. I have clients offshore around the world chomping at the bit to come and invest in infrastructure in South Africa in huge sums, that the government just simply doesn't have that sort of slick, if you like, process in place on this yet. So yes, I think that the frustration is what's really grating here. And I think that's reflected now in business sentiment as well.
Yeah, well, let's hope for movement and some of that money coming in. Thank you very much, both, for your analysis tonight. That was Dr. Iraj Abedian, the CEO of Pan-African Investments and Research Services. Peter Attard Montalto, he's the head of capital market research at Intellidex.